Imagine standing in a brightly lit pharmacy aisle in late September of 1982. You reach for a familiar red and white box of pain relief medication to cure a simple headache or a mild fever. This mundane action, which millions of Americans perform daily without a second thought, suddenly became a game of Russian roulette. In the autumn of 1982, a shadow fell over the suburbs of Chicago, Illinois, turning medicine cabinets into sources of terror. An unknown killer had weaponized one of the most trusted brands in the country, transforming a cure into a lethal poison. This event would forever change how the world packages and consumes consumer products, leaving a legacy of fear that lingers today. The nightmare began on the morning of September 29th in Elk Grove Village, Illinois. 12-year-old Mary Kellerman woke up complaining of a sore throat and a runny nose. Her parents, loving and concerned, decided to keep her home from school and gave her one extra-strength Tylenol capsule to ease her discomfort. Mary went into the bathroom to take the medicine and collapsed on the floor moments later. Her parents rushed into the room to find their daughter unresponsive and gasping for air. Paramedics arrived quickly, but despite their frantic efforts, Mary Kellerman was pronounced dead at Alexian Brothers Medical Center shortly after arrival, leaving doctors baffled by her sudden demise. Later that very same morning in the nearby town of Arlington Heights, a postal worker named Adam Janus also woke up feeling under the weather. The 27-year-old stopped at a local Jewel grocery store to purchase a bottle of extra-strength Tylenol. He returned home and took 2 capsules before collapsing in his kitchen, struggling to breathe. His family watched in horror as his chest heaved violently before he fell still. Adam was rushed to Northwest Community Hospital, where emergency room staff fought to save him. Tragically, their efforts were in vain, and Adam Janus passed away from what doctors initially suspected was a massive heart attack despite his young age and good health. The tragedy for the Janus family was far from over as grief-stricken relatives gathered at the home of Adam Janus to mourn his sudden passing. His brother Stanley Janus and his sister-in-law Teresa Janus were among those who came to comfort the family. Consumed by the stress of the day and a pounding headache, Stanley found the open bottle of Tylenol on the kitchen counter that Adam had used just hours before. Stanley took a capsule and offered one to his wife Teresa. Within minutes, both Stanley and Teresa collapsed on the floor in front of their terrified family, members mirroring the exact symptoms that had killed Adam. Emergency services were called back to the Janus residence for the second time that day amidst a scene of absolute chaos and confusion. The paramedics who had transported Adam earlier could not believe they were returning to the same address for 2 more critical patients. Stanley Janus died that same day, while Teresa Janus lingered on life support for 2 days before succumbing to the poison. The sudden death of 3 healthy family members in the same house raised immediate alarms. A perceptive nurse named Helen Jensen and firefighter Philip Capitelli began to suspect that something in the house, specifically the medication, was the common denominator. While the authorities in Arlington Heights were scrambling to make sense of the Janus family tragedy, the invisible killer claimed another victim in the suburb of Winfield. Mary Riener was 27 years old and had recently given birth to her 4th child. She was enjoying the simple happiness of being a new mother when she developed a headache. She took Tylenol capsules from a bottle she had purchased recently. Like the others, she collapsed quickly and was rushed to the hospital. Mary Riener died, leaving behind a grieving husband and 4 young children, including an infant who would never know her mother. The poison continued its deadly work across the Chicago suburbs, striking down 31-year-old Mary McFarland in Lombard, Illinois. Mary McFarland worked at an Illinois Bell phone center and had told her coworkers she had a bad headache. She went into the break room and took medication to help her get through the rest of her shift. Moments later, she collapsed on the floor of the break room. She was transported to a local hospital, where doctors were equally puzzled by her condition. Despite aggressive treatment, Mary McFarland passed away, adding another name to the growing list of victims who had died under mysterious circumstances that day. The final victim of this initial wave of terror was a flight attendant named Paula Prince. She was 35 years old and had just returned to Chicago from a long flight. Tired and suffering from jet lag, she stopped at a Walgreens on North Wells Street in Chicago to buy a bottle of extra-strength Tylenol. Security footage from the store would later show a chilling image of Paula Prince purchasing the very bottle that would end her life. She went home to her apartment, took the medication, and was found dead 2 days later by concerned friends who had not heard from her. As the death toll climbed, investigators and medical professionals began to communicate and connect the disparate cases. Nurse Helen Jensen at the hospital treating the Janus family insisted that the Tylenol bottle be tested. She noted that the victims had all taken the medication shortly before collapsing. Her intuition proved to be the pivotal breakthrough in the case. When the medical examiner smelled the bottle taken from the Janus home, he detected the distinct and pungent odor of bitter almonds. This was the telltale olfactory signature of cyanide, a fast-acting and incredibly lethal chemical poison. Toxicology reports confirmed the worst fears of the medical community and law enforcement agencies. The capsules in the bottles found with the victims had been tampered with. Someone had carefully opened the red and white gelatin capsules, removed the acetaminophen powder, and replaced it with a lethal dose of potassium cyanide. The amount of cyanide found in some of the capsules was 10,000 times the amount needed to kill a human being. The victims never stood a chance. The cyanide destroyed their ability to process oxygen, causing rapid cellular death and suffocation from within. News of the cyanide poisoning spread through Chicago and the entire nation with the speed of a wildfire. Panic gripped the population as people realized that a common household item found in nearly every medicine cabinet could be a murder weapon. Police cars drove through the streets of Chicago neighborhoods, using loudspeakers to warn residents not to take Tylenol. It was a scene reminiscent of wartime civil defense drills. Television and radio stations interrupted regular programming to broadcast urgent warnings. The fear was palpable, and the trust in consumer safety was shattered in an instant. Johnson & Johnson, the parent company of the makers of Tylenol, faced an unprecedented corporate crisis. In a move that is still studied in business schools, today they prioritized public safety over profit. The company issued a nationwide recall of 31 million bottles of Tylenol, with a retail value of over $100 million. They halted all production and advertising of the product. They urged the public to destroy any Tylenol products they had in their homes. This decisive action likely saved countless lives and established a new standard for corporate responsibility during a disaster. The investigation that followed was one of the largest in American history, involving the FBI and the Illinois State Police. A task force was assembled to hunt down the person or persons responsible for these random acts of violence. Investigators determined that the tampering had not occurred at the manufacturing plants. Instead, the killer had purchased or stolen bottles of Tylenol from various retail stores, including Jewel and Walgreens and Osco Drug. They took the bottles home, laced the capsules with cyanide, and then returned the deadly packages to the store shelves. This method of operation meant that the killer was likely a local resident familiar with the distribution of stores in the Chicago suburbs. The random nature of the placement made the crime even more terrifying. The killer did not target specific individuals, but rather sought to create maximum chaos and fear. Profilers suggested the perpetrator was likely a loner filled with rage against society, who derived satisfaction from the widespread panic. Despite thousands of leads and interviews, the police struggled to find a solid suspect who could be placed at the scenes. One name that rose to the top of the suspect list was James William Lewis. Lewis sent a letter to Johnson, and Johnson demanding $1 million to stop the killings. He was a man with a troubled past and a history of violent behavior. The FBI launched a massive manhunt for Lewis, eventually tracking him down in New York City. However, investigators could not find any physical evidence linking him to the actual poisonings in Chicago. It appeared he was an opportunist trying to profit from the tragedy, rather than the killer himself. James Lewis was eventually convicted of extortion for the letter he sent to Johnson & Johnson, and served over 12 years in federal prison. He continued to be a person of interest for decades, and maintained his innocence regarding the murders until his death. He even offered to help the FBI solve the case, providing sketches and theories that some investigators felt were too detailed to be mere speculation. Yet without DNA evidence or a confession, James Lewis remained an enigma, a man who inserted himself into the narrative, but could never be definitively tied to the crimes. Another suspect who drew the attention of law enforcement was Roger Arnold. Arnold worked at a jewel warehouse that distributed Tylenol and was known to be an amateur chemist. He reportedly possessed books on poisons and had made comments that raised suspicion among his acquaintances. Police raided his home and found a chemistry lab and various weapons, but they did not find potassium cyanide. The pressure of the investigation caused Arnold to spiral into paranoia and violence, eventually leading him to kill a man he mistakenly thought had reported him to the police. The tragedy of the Roger Arnold investigation was that it ruined his life and led to an unrelated murder, yet he was never charged with the Tylenol killings. The evidence against him was circumstantial and failed to meet the burden of proof required for a murder indictment. The case against Arnold faded, as did many other leads, leaving investigators frustrated. The lack of surveillance cameras in stores in 1982 meant there was no footage of the killer placing the tainted bottles back on the shelves, a crucial piece of evidence that would be easily available today. As years turned into decades, the Tylenol murders remained a cold case, haunting the families of the 7 victims. Advances in forensic science brought renewed hope periodically. In recent years, authorities have re-examined the evidence using modern DNA technology, attempting to find a genetic profile on the bottles or boxes that were preserved. However, the degradation of evidence over 40 years poses a significant challenge. The identity of the Tylenol killer remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of American criminal history. The legacy of the Tylenol murders is visible in every grocery store and pharmacy around the world today. Before 1982, over-the-counter medicines were not sealed. You could simply unscrew the cap and access the pills. In response to the murders, Johnson & Johnson worked with the FDA to introduce tamper-resistant packaging. Foil seals on bottle openings, plastic bands around lids, and box seals became the industry standard. These safety measures, which we take for granted now, were a direct result of the 7 lives lost in Chicago. In addition to packaging changes, the legal landscape shifted dramatically. In 1983, the United States Congress passed the Federal Anti-Tampering Act, making it a federal crime to tamper with consumer products. This legislation gave federal agencies more power to investigate and prosecute such crimes, ensuring that future perpetrators would face severe consequences. The Tylenol murders marked the end of an era of innocence, where consumers trusted that the products on store shelves were safe. The psychological impact on the American public was profound and lasting. Halloween of 1982 was permanently altered, with many towns banning trick or treating due to fears of poisoned candy. Parents checked every wrapper and seal with obsessive care. The trust between neighbor and neighbor was eroded, replaced by a suspicion that a monster could be lurking in plain sight. The Tylenol murders introduced the concept of random consumer terrorism to the national consciousness. The mystery endures because it defies the traditional motives of murder. There was no financial gain for the killer, no personal vendetta against the victims, and no political manifesto. It was an act of pure nihilism, designed to inflict pain on strangers. The killer possessed a terrifying combination of intelligence, patience, and sociopathy. They executed the plan with precision and vanished without a trace, leaving behind only broken families and a frightened nation. Some amateur sleuths and criminologists have proposed connections to other famous criminals. Theories have even floated around linking the Unabomber Ted Kaczynski to the crimes, given his proximity to the area and his hatred of modern industrial society. Kaczynski had family in the Chicago suburbs and fit the profile of a highly intelligent loner capable of constructing such a plot. However, the FBI investigated this link and found no conclusive evidence to support the theory that the Unabomber was the Tylenol killer. The investigation remains open to this day, with the FBI and local police still accepting tips. The hope is that someone somewhere knows something. Perhaps a deathbed confession or a forgotten piece of evidence will finally shed light on the truth. Until then, the families of Mary Kellerman, Adam Janus, Stanley Janus, Teresa Janus, Mary Riener, Mary McFarland, and Paula Prince wait for justice. Their loved ones were the innocent casualties of a crime that changed the world. The Tylenol murders serve as a grim reminder of the vulnerability of modern society. A single individual with a dark intent disrupted the lives of millions and forced a global industry to reinvent itself. The safety seals we peel off our vitamins and the plastic rings we break on our milk jugs are silent memorials to the 7 victims. Every time we struggle to open a tamper-proof package, we are interacting with the history of this unsolved crime. As we look back at the events of 1982, we are left with a chilling question. Who was the person who walked the aisles of those Chicago stores carrying death in their pocket? Did they watch the news reports with satisfaction? Did they ever strike again? The face of the Tylenol killer remains blank, a phantom in the history of true crime. The case stands as a testament to the fact that sometimes, despite the best efforts of law enforcement, evil can walk among us unrecognized and unpunished. Today, the memorial for the victims stands as a place of quiet reflection. It honors the lives cut short and the resilience of the families who survived. The story of the Tylenol murders is not just a story of a crime, but a story of how society responds to terror. It is a narrative of lost panic and ultimately adaptation. The killer may have taken 7 lives, but they failed to destroy the spirit of the community, which rallied together to protect one another. For the Midnight Docket, the Tylenol murders represent the ultimate cold case. It contains all the elements of a terrifying thriller, but it is tragically real. It reminds us that history is not just about wars and politics, but about the sudden, inexplicable events that alter the course of daily life. As we close this file, we remember the names of the victims, and we keep the light of inquiry burning, hoping that one day the shadows will lift and the truth will finally be revealed. Until that day comes, the mystery of the Tylenol murders in 1982 remains a dark chapter in American history. It is a cautionary tale about trust and safety in an open society. So the next time you open a sealed bottle of medication, take a moment to remember why that seal is there. Remember the 7 people in Chicago who paid the ultimate price for our safety. This is the Midnight Docket, signing off on one of the most perplexing puzzles of the 20th century.